American University in Bulgaria.
This is Sarah Perrine. She's our guest lecturer for tonight. She's going to lecture, share her experience, and talk about the women's position in a non-governmental organization. And also for non-profit organizations who have experience. She's going to talk more about her career and experience with us, and I'm very happy to welcome you in our AUBG community, and all the people present in the room are very glad to have you here. And I want to thank all the members of the club who are eager to help and who organized the event, especially Zlati. She did an incredible job, and all the girls who helped her, I really appreciate it. So, special thanks to everyone who made this event possible, and Sarah did come eventually, that was the purpose. So I hope that we're going to enjoy it. And again, thank you for your participation and that you honored our invitation. It was really nice. And we're eager to hear what you're going to share with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. I understand that there's a vacation coming up and some people might want to travel, so I appreciate that you've taken the time to come out this evening and think a little bit about a subject which is, I think, quite important, and that is the role of women in non-governmental organizations. My name is Sarah Perrine. I've been working with the America for Bulgaria Foundation for about 3.5 years as Director of Programs for the Economically Disadvantaged. The foundation is creating a separate organization, which is going to be called the Trust for Social Achievement, and they've made me the Chief Executive Officer of that organization. So it looks like I'll be in Bulgaria for quite some more years to come, and I'm really excited about that opportunity as well. Just to give you a little bit of a background about me, I have been working in a number of different sectors, so anybody who has questions about just about anything can ask me. I started off at Montpellier College, which was the first university for women in the United States. And then I joined the United States Peace Corps, and I became a teacher in Bulgaria in the 90s. It was my first exposure to Bulgaria. I lived in Shumen, if there's anybody from Shumen. I also started off in Samarkand, where I lived with the Roma family, and they were quite lovely. And I got very interested in culture. So after I finished teaching, I left, and I went and I worked in the United States for a while with a bank, in the private sector. And then I received a Fulbright fellowship to come back and do some research. I was looking at leadership trends among non-governmental organizations that were representing minority groups in Bulgaria. So I came back. Then I left again to get a master's degree in public policy. After I completed that degree, I was offered a position with the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, in Washington, D.C. And I worked in the Office of Civil Rights and Democracy. And then I moved to the State Department to work on peacekeeping. While I was working in the State Department on peacekeeping, I was in Liberia for some time and in Sudan. And at some point, I met the program board for the America for Bulgaria Foundation, which was just starting its activities in Bulgaria. And we started to talk about some of my experience in Bulgaria, and particularly my interest in minority issues. And they asked me to come back and work with the foundation. So I said, sounds good. And I quit the government, and I went back to the non-for-profit sector. So that's a little bit about me, and we can talk more about me later. It's a kind of a broad topic, and I wasn't 100% sure what your experiences are or what your interests are, so I thought I'd start with a little bit of a background. What is an NGO? Well, there's a lot of different kinds of organizations in the world. There are business organizations, governmental organizations, IGOs, which means intergovernmental organizations, and non-governmental organizations, or non-profit organizations. Each of these organizations has a different goal. I like interactive talks, so maybe somebody can tell me in 2 words, what's the goal for a business organization? Profit. Great profit and wealth for the owner or shareholders. How about a governmental organization? We can't always be simple. Establish laws and policies to protect the state and its citizens. That's what a government's supposed to do. How about an intergovernmental organization? Okay, can anybody give an example? What's an NGO? UN, it's the most famous one. How about another one? European Union, it's a good one. It's a supranational organization, which is an elevated form of an NGO. Any other examples?
Universal Postal Union.
Which one?
Universal Postal Union.
Universal Postal Union could be an example, I suppose. Or the World Health Organization is another famous one. So this is where members, and the members are separate governmental entities, create forums to address specific issues. UNICEF, UNHCR, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, all of those are organizations whose members are not individuals. The members are states who get together to discuss a certain issue, right? The difference between an IGO and an NGO is that an NGO is created by individuals, not by corporations, not by governments, but by individuals who register and unite to support a specific cause or a specific mission. A non-governmental organization or a non-profit organization is legally registered, and in order to legally register, you need to create an article of incorporation, a mission statement, and you need to create a board. The reason you need to create a board is for oversight and transparency, to make sure that the NGO is not something shady. So the most important part of the NGO is its mission. And the mission can be anything except for one thing. What do you think the one thing is? Profit. So an NGO's mission is not supposed to be to create profit. That's the role of the business in society. The NGO's mission can be something to support the public good. It can be humanitarian, it can be rights-based, it can protect vulnerable groups, areas, promote common interests, arts, business. Sometimes people think of NGOs just as being humanitarian, but unions can be NGOs, museums can be NGOs, hospitals can be NGOs, anything that's not created for profit. Research, education, a lot of universities in the United States are considered nonprofits. So, I like history, and one of the reasons I got involved in the nonprofit sector is because I was inspired by a number of women who have done amazing things. And I think it's important when we talk about the role of women in the nonprofit sector to think a little bit about who came first. So thinking about NGOs or thinking about nonprofits, we have what we call first wave activists. Women who first got interested in trying to support some sort of cause or trying to promote something for the public. What do you think the first thing would have been that would have been interesting for women? Why would have women gotten together? The right to vote. Right, good, the right to vote. First drawn to issues of immediate concern, suffrage, the right to vote, sorry. Relief of human suffering is another one. I don't know if it's stereotypical or not, but women seem to have been interested in suffering for a long time throughout history, which means protecting the wounded in battle, protecting orphans, protecting the sick. Labor protection was another big one, and broader social concerns and education. These are the things that first drew women into the nonprofit sector. So a couple of examples of people that I find very interesting, and you can tell me if you've heard of these people and if this is boring or if this is interesting. Has anybody ever heard of Elizabeth Cady Stanton? Well, she represents one of the first movements in the NGO sector, which was the suffrage movement. Suffrage means, you know what suffrage means? Anybody know? Suffrage is the word that means the right to vote. So, women were first, of course, drawn to the right to vote. The suffrage issue was important for people because they didn't have any rights. A lot of them got their start, however, in the United States with the abolitionist movement. That's another long word. Does anybody know anything about the abolitionist movement?
The abolishment of slavery.
Right, the abolishment of slavery. And the interesting thing about Elizabeth Cady Stanton is she was married to an abolitionist and she was really interested in slavery. And she went to London in the 1830s. Another historian. 1840s. She went to London in the 1840s to attend a World Anti-Slavery Conference, which sounds like a nice thing. Sounds like something a woman might get interested in. And she met a number of other women there who were interested in the same issue. But she was surprised by something. When she got there, what do you think happened? The men said, "You can't participate. This is for men only." And she said, "I'm an abolitionist too." And they raised some sort of a scandal. And the men said, "Okay, you can participate, but you can only participate in the back. And we're going to put a curtain so the men don't have to look at you while they're talking." Sounds a little bit like some things that are happening in other parts of the world today. So this made her really angry, of course. She went all the way to London to participate in an abolitionist event, and they told her she couldn't because she was a woman. And this was the start of some connections she made with other women, which led to the first Women's Rights Convention in 1848 in Seneca Falls. And that was the first time that women got together and drafted a declaration of what they expected from society. One thing was suffrage, the right to vote. So she co-founded the National Women's Suffrage Movement and served as the president of the organization for 21 years. Very important person in the nonprofit sector, and one of the first issues that was important for women. Another issue that was important for women, I'm sure you all know who this is, right? Does everybody know who she is? No? Who knows who Florence Nightingale? Feminists unite! Who knows who Florence Nightingale is? Okay. Florence Nightingale was another very important woman in the non-for-profit sector. She was a nurse. She was raised in a very wealthy family. She was very well educated. And it was expected, as she was British, it was expected that she would marry and have children and be a good aristocrat. She decided she wasn't interested in that and she wanted to do something productive with her life, so she learned how to become a nurse. However, when she learned how to become a nurse, nursing was not considered a profession. It was something women did to help out, but it wasn't a profession like it is today. She went to the Crimean War, and she took 38 women that she had trained with her. And she won a lot of fame. She was called the Lady of the Lamp because she went from soldier to soldier and she comforted them as they were dying. And they used her in the media to promote the war and to promote patriotism at home. And she became very popular. So what did she do? Like any good activist, she used her popularity to raise money. She went home, and in 1855, the Nightingale Fund was established. She got together all her business connections, all the wealthy, aristocratic women, and they donated money and established a fund to start a training school called the Nightingale Training School. One of her greatest achievements was not only that she made the nursing profession a real profession, but that she introduced trained nurses into places where trained nurses did not typically want to go. And those were the workhouses, which is where debtors went back in the day in England. If you didn't have money, you ended up in a workhouse, and if you got sick, nobody took care of you. She said that wasn't right, it wasn't just, so she introduced nurses, and this was the first time that people who had no money were attended by trained staff. So she was very important for the health movement. Anybody heard of Mother Jones? Mother Jones was considered one of the most dangerous people of her era. That's what a male senator called her, because she was an advocate for labor rights. Back 100, 200 years ago, there weren't a lot of laws to protect people who worked. So for example, you could be forced to work for 12, 15, 16 hours a day. It wasn't necessary that your employer paid you on time. And there were no laws to protect children, so children could be forced to work as well. That would make her very angry, so she coordinated major strikes throughout the country. Can anybody tell me what a strike is? A strike? It's kind of a protest. It's a specific kind of protest.
So you stop working for a certain period of time?
Yeah. A strike is basically when you convince all of the people who work in a particular place, maybe it's a factory, maybe it's a mine, to stop working so that production stops. And this, of course, hurts the employer, so the employer has to listen to her demands. Which means businesses hated her because she was convincing people to not work, right? But she was convincing them for a good reason, because she was trying to raise awareness about the fact that people were being exploited. One of her most famous protests that she organized was in 1903. She wanted to bring attention to the fact that children were working in mills and mines and that they were being disabled. Their fingers were getting chopped off, their legs, their arms, because they were young, and there was no law to protect them. And nobody cared. So she went to the media and she said, "Can you please write this in the newspaper?" And the newspaper said, "Actually, we belong to those businesses, so we can't write anything like that. That would be quite bad for us since they give us money." Sounds like some things that happen today, right? So the businesses control the media. So she said, "Well, I need to raise awareness somehow." And she convinced hundreds of children and their mothers to leave work and to march all the way from Philadelphia to New York to the president's house to demonstrate what was happening. Well, the president didn't meet with her, and a lot of people got angry at her, but it did get into the media, and it was a very important event in terms of raising awareness about the need to protect children, especially children who are exploited by employers. Very important. The last one I was going to talk about is Jane Addams. She's very American. Maybe you haven't heard of her. Anybody heard of Jane Addams? She did win a Nobel Peace Prize. She was the second woman to receive a Nobel Peace Prize, and the first one was a friend of Mr. Nobel himself. So she might be not that I want to criticize the first one, she might be the first authentic one to win a Peace Prize. And there wasn't another woman until the 1970s who won one again. So women are also a little bit underrepresented in the Peace Prize world, but she did win one in 1931. What did she do? She was interested in education and in world peace. And she created something called the Hull House, which was really interesting. She purchased a mansion, she renovated it. Once again, she went out and she gathered all of her wealthy friends and connections and business people and convinced them to give money to the Hull House so that they could start providing services in a poor neighborhood, including night education for adults who did not have a degree, kindergarten, fitness, library, debates. And one of the ideas for the Hull House was not just to serve poor people, but to make it a place for debate. So a lot of rich people came too, and they'd stay there for a while, and they'd interact with each other, and they'd generate all sorts of conversations. It became a very famous model and was replicated throughout the world. And later she became involved in an international peace movement, and the president of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1931. So, that's kind of the groundwork. In the beginning, women were interested in things that were close to them. Suffrage, suffering, education, children. Nowadays, of course, women have shattered the glass ceiling. And they're involved in everything. Economic development, research, housing, health and family planning. What is family planning? It's another important one for women. Family. Birth control. Yeah, making sure people have birth control. Literacy, environment, animal cruelty. I'm a vegetarian. Food and nutrition. There's a big advocate for this cause now, and her name is Michelle Obama. However, getting to the punchline. Despite the fact that women have always been involved in the NGO sector, so it's a little different than business. In fact, there was a survey that nearly 73% of workers in the nonprofit sphere are women, so it's very heavily female, which is quite interesting. But despite that fact, women make up only 21% of the chief executive officers at major nonprofits. Sounds a little bit like business. Female CEOs are actually worse off today than they were 10 years ago. In 2000, female CEOs made up 71% of male salaries. Nowadays, they make only 66% of their male pure salaries. The reason women are making less compared to men is not necessarily that we're making less total, but it means that men are getting paid more. And the reason men are getting paid more is that they're starting to recruit them from the business sector, because people start to understand that NGOs need to be run like businesses. They want to headhunt and get somebody quite famous, and they end up offering a lot of money. In fact, there was a lot of controversy in the United States about a year ago because they published statistics, and the 20 biggest NGOs in the United States were offering their CEOs more than $1 million a year in compensation, which is a lot. And the majority of them were men. Maybe they deserved it. You know, CEOs and businesses make about 10 times that much. But it's controversial because it's a nonprofit. Oops. And women also account for only 33% of board seats at major nonprofits, which is also unfortunate. Does anybody know what the function of a board is in a nonprofit? The board of directors are the people that are selected not as employees, but as the ones who oversee the mission of the foundation or the mission of the NGO. So they're kind of a little bit like Congress as regards the citizens. They're the controlling board for the NGO. They're the ones who make the decisions. And unfortunately, women have a really hard time getting appointed to board seats. So, the NGO sector is also looking for pretty good women to change the trend. A lot of times people, if they want to succeed in the NGO sector today, need to approach it very much like you would approach finding a career in the business sector. In order to get promoted in the NGO sector, they oftentimes look for business skills. And in the same way that businesses are evaluated according to the profit that they gain for the shareholders, nowadays, NGOs are really evaluated according to outcomes and social gains, which has changed a little bit. In the past, it was enough to do good. Now you have to show how much good you've done. To be a good leader, it's very much similar to the business sector. You have to be mission-oriented. The mission in the business sector is to create profit. The mission in the NGO sector can be different, but whatever it is, you need to keep focused on it. You need to make sure everybody's focused on it. If the mission is to increase education, then you need to keep focused on it. If the mission is to protect the environment, you need to make sure you demonstrate how you've protected the environment, to what degree. You need to be visionary, which means that it's not enough to want to just do good, as I said. You need to set a vision. By 2020, I want to reduce carbon levels by X%. By 2020, I want to make sure that 5% of the Hispanic population increases access to university. By 2020, I want to make sure that half of Roma children in Bulgaria complete their high school education. By 2020, I want to make sure that AIDS is eradicated, which I think Bill Gates would like to do by 2050 or something. You need to be analytical. You need to be able to demonstrate with numbers what you've achieved. You need to be objective. There's something in the NGO sector called mission creep, which means you become so enthusiastic about your cause that you forget to be realistic about what you've actually accomplished, and you need to be honest. And here's that. So that's a little bit of an overview. Again, I wasn't 100% sure what would be interesting for you, but I always think it's good to get a little bit of a background in terms of history. Because as women, it's very important for us to understand where we've come from, who are the people who came before us, and why did they get involved in the NGO sector? Why did they feel it was important? And thinking about now, what do we think is important? How do we want to get involved? And if we do, is it enough to want to get involved? Or do we have to perform in a specific way to show that we can achieve something when we do get involved? I think that that's the name of the game now in the NGO sector. It's not enough to desire for change to happen. You need to prove to people that you can achieve it, which is, of course, quite challenging, but the world is challenging. And the flip side is that there are a lot of opportunities in the NGO sector for people who are willing to take the challenge. There are more and more NGOs now than there used to be. There are all sorts of causes that people can get involved in. If you're interested in something, you almost certainly can find a job in that sphere, which maybe wasn't true 50 years ago. The number of types of professions has grown exponentially. But you do have to be prepared for it, and it is challenging. But I think it's worth doing. So, I like things to be interactive. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that, or maybe you can tell me a little bit about why you came to this session and if there's any particular cause that you're interested in. Or are you all business people? The other thing I should mention, because it's quite important, is that none of those people in the past or nobody today would have succeeded without the help of business people. Because everything in life requires money. And usually, all organizations start from the same place. I don't know if I can flip that to the beginning, but there would be no government employees if people didn't pay their taxes. And people wouldn't pay taxes if they didn't have a job with a business, right? There would be no member states if there was no business generating wealth. And there would be no NGOs if people didn't contribute to them. So I think it's another thing to remember when we get kind of self-righteous about NGOs, that there would be no NGOs if there was no business. And sometimes the best way to contribute is through making a financial contribution to some cause that you care about, which is also important. I've worked in a number of places. Like I said, I've worked in a bank. I worked with the United States government. I did a graduate level fellowship with UNICEF in Geneva, also with the International Migration Organization, and with NGOs. And I think I can say that the most satisfying career for me was with the NGO sector. I think it offers a lot of room for creativity and flexibility, but it's also a little bit scary. Sometimes working for an NGO is a bit like being an entrepreneur, right? You have to take risks. You're not always sure you're going to get a grant. You don't know if you're going to get money. So it means that you're taking some risks for something you care deeply about. But I like that. I think it's exciting. What are you mostly studying? Business? What attracted you to the business sphere?
I have a question. Because I'm not quite sure I really understand the system in the NGOs. So I realized that an NGO is made with non-profit purpose. Mm-hmm. But the people that work there, do they get any profit, and who actually works there just for charity and just for the idea, and who works for the profit there?
It's perfectly acceptable for an NGO to make money. In fact, there are a lot of non-profit organizations in the United States that make a lot of money. Like a hospital, for example. In Bulgaria, hospitals are almost all municipal or private. In the United States, we have non-profit hospitals that are arranged around particular causes like cancer or children. Those can be non-profit. The distinction between a non-profit organization and a profit organization is that any profit has to be returned to a social cause. So in a business, if you generate profit, you give it to your shareholders. In a not-for-profit, if you generate profit, you feed it back to a social cause. So people who work for a nonprofit get salaries, and like I mentioned, some of them get very big salaries. There are 20 people in the United States now who make more than $1 million a year as CEOs of nonprofits, because that's considered an operating expense. But a nonprofit does not have a board of shareholders that receive money from its activities. All of its activities have to support social projects. So it's not the same as a voluntary organization. The difference between an NGO and a voluntary association is that a voluntary association is what you're doing right now, right? The Women in Business is a voluntary organization. You all are interested in business, you study business, you wanted to get together to learn about some new things, so you made an organization. I don't think any of you are getting paid. So you're a voluntary organization. An NGO is a real structured with real employees and real operating costs. I receive a salary for my work, but the organization does not distribute money to shareholders. It distributes money to projects.
How would you compare the salary in the NGOs compared to the business salaries in ordinary businesses?
I think that's a really good question because it does differ. I think starting salaries in the business sector tend to be much higher. But there is room in the NGO sector to get a pretty good salary, depending on the size of the nonprofit and the type of the nonprofit. The highest salaries in the nonprofit sphere tend to be in health, the arts, like the Metropolitan Opera, the Museum of Modern Art, and research institutes. And what?
Universities.
And universities, I'm sorry, those are also very high paid. The administrative jobs, not the teaching jobs per se sometimes. So those jobs are well paid. The jobs that I read online that tend to be the least well paid are those in the environmental sector, some relief organizations, and religious charities. Those people don't tend to be paid as well. That's according to some survey I read online. I imagine there's some differentiation depending on the size of the organization itself. So yeah, there's a definite career path within the nonprofit sector which can lead to a very nice job, but the entry-level positions don't tend to be. And that's true of university too, I suppose. If you're a teaching assistant, you're not that well paid, but once you get tenure, you're well paid, so you have to work your way up. Whereas the business sector, sometimes it's the same, but sometimes you can start off at a higher level, depending on the kind of business.
Why did you choose Bulgaria?
That's a good question, although I did not, I have to admit, choose Bulgaria. I chose Eastern Europe because my first experience abroad was in Eastern Germany when I was a high schooler in the 1980s, and I was really interested in it. And then when I was in college, I did a Habitat for Humanity project, which is another NGO in Poland, and I really liked it. So when I got into Peace Corps, I said I want to go to Eastern Europe, and they said, how about Bulgaria? And I actually had a really good friend, Emma Hoyok, who is Bulgarian, and she told me all sorts of good things. So I said, great, sounds good. And I'm glad. Actually at the time I kind of wanted Poland, and they said Poland was closing, but they were going to send me here, and I have to say in retrospect that I was really lucky to come to Bulgaria. The food's much better than in Poland. So I was happy with it, yeah.
What's the job security like in NGOs, would you say? Do you find that a lot of people are cut when you get budget cuts or you don't receive grants?
I think, again, it depends on the kind of NGO. So there are some NGOs that are so established, a university, a major museum, or a big Greenpeace type operation. So probably the job security there is relatively good, or decent. You can also get cut from a private job pretty easily if there's a budget downturn. But if you're working for a smaller NGO that depends entirely, that has no endowment, that depends entirely on grant to grant, then it can be more risky. Although generally NGOs that operate on a grant-by-grant basis, also you have a more clear projection of how long the job will last. A lot of times people in the NGO sector get a contract, so you know it's going to last 2 years because that's how long the grant is. And I don't know that you get that kind of security in the private sector because you could get a job in an IT company that loses clients and then you could lose your job. So I think there's always trade-offs, you know. There's a lot of risk in every part of life.
Do you think that NGOs can be started mainly with people that have money and funds to put in, or they can attract people's attention by organizing strikes, demonstrations? I mean, what is the tendency? People that are more wealthy and can put money in this and develop the business, for example, or they use unconventional ways to attract people's attention other than their own funds.
Yeah, I can think of examples to support both types of models. Although if I have to be 100% honest, a lot of the more successful people, including these people in history, usually had at least a couple of friends who could help them out in the beginning. It's quite helpful. That's just honest. But you can do it in other ways. It's not necessary to have connections with some philanthropists in the beginning. You can also start a creative campaign. And a lot of very successful movements are started at a grassroots level without any money at all, because somebody's just excited about something and they want to share the idea and they volunteer and it grows and then people pay attention and then they want to give money. It's not that you had connections with them in the beginning, but they see that you're doing something and they want to help. And it can grow in that way as well. The most important thing, if you think about it from a philanthropist point of view, so this is somebody who wants to give money to your NGO, people who give money want to feel good about the money that they've given. So they want to be excited about what you're doing and they want to believe that it's actually happening. So if you're really working and producing something, a lot of times it generates its own excitement, because there are a number of people in the world who do want to do something good. You'd be surprised how many Wall Street bankers want to help in some way. And so if they find out that there's something that's really helping, they get excited by it. But it's important to show results, especially nowadays. It's important to be able to prove that what you're doing is actually helping somebody.
Yeah, exactly. And this, like you're eager to help and the satisfaction that you get. For example, I've been in Red Cross, which is an NGO, for 7 years now, and I'm a volunteer and I don't get paid, but when I go there and participate voluntarily and I go help societies, participate in projects, so on, so the satisfaction level in NGOs is on a very high level. It's almost like a mission that you fulfill, and you have personal benefit. You enrich yourself by doing this in NGO. For example, the volunteer stuff.
This is a really good word. I hope I can spell it right. I'm ignoring my psychological. How do I spell psychological? Help me. Psychological capital. Psychological capital. Obviously, I'm not a good speller. This is like a really popular term right now. I don't know if anybody's heard it, but psychological capital basically means, I don't know if you've been studying economics, but supposedly you get utility for everything, right? So everything is measured in terms of utility. So you purchase a pair of jeans and it gives you a certain level of utility. You purchase an ice cream cone and it gives you a certain level of utility. But there's something called psychological capital, which a lot of people are talking about nowadays, which basically means you can get a certain level of utility from doing something that's not at all connected to money. And a lot of times it's from volunteering. And basically this is just a fancy way of saying that it feels good to help people, and it's worth doing because it makes you happy. You know, I think it's a good idea to volunteer.
How an NGO position itself in terms of branding? How do you attract all the volunteers and investors who can donate something?
Yeah, branding is really important, and the more successful ones are the ones who do a good job branding. People who think about branding tend to do better than those who don't think about it. So again, it's bringing a business mindset. There are a surprising number of people in the NGO sector who want to believe that they don't have to sell themselves, that it's enough to do good. And that's not necessarily true. You have to do good, but you have to sell it as well. And that means thinking very carefully about how you convey your image to other people and how you brand it and how you really define the image that you're trying to create with a specific group of people. So it's important.
How important it is to have local people helping in the NGOs, for example. Not only to have the money, but you need the right people in the community to help.
Yeah, and again, this is another practice taken from business. Any business fails if you don't hire the right staff or you don't locate the right people to work with, and I think it's the same in the NGO sector. And you can probably identify countless examples of well-meaning individuals who go into, I don't know, a ghetto in Chicago without knowing anybody in Chicago and fail because they failed to establish the right types of contacts with the right kind of people on the ground. So it's really important if you have a cause or a mission that you think about who your allies can be and who can help you, whether that means hiring them on your staff or just making them a board member or making them an advisor or inviting them to meetings, getting them feedback in some way so that you make sure that you have their input. It's very important. Otherwise, you're operating in a bubble without any feedback from the community that you're trying to serve. Which is important in all spheres. A lot of times I get kind of drawn back into the development sphere because I work in development, but let's say that you're working for a museum, which is also a nonprofit. If you're not seeking feedback from the people who come to your museum, the museum will very quickly become boring, right? Nobody wants to see your exhibitions because you're not soliciting feedback on whether those are interesting or not. So surveys and soliciting an opinion and getting feedback is very important in any kind of endeavor.
What is the most usual way to recruit people for NGOs?
That's a good question because, like I mentioned, I'm starting this new organization called the Trust for Social Achievement, and my biggest challenge has been trying to hire staff. And I've tried a number of different ways. I advertised in Capital and Job Tiger, and I got about 200 applications from people who had no idea what I was doing and just wanted a job. So it was a bit of a pain. So then you start thinking about, well, how can I specialize my search? And you start contacting people who work in a particular sphere and see if they know people who have some kind of expertise. So there's a little bit of headhunting. But it's a difficult balance because in Bulgaria, if I were to depend only on the NGOs that are very well established, it means that I risk missing out on people with new ideas. So I think it's very important from the perspective of an employer to be open and to hire people who might not necessarily have experience in a particular area, but who have a vision for what they would do if they were given a chance. Because sometimes young people come with better ideas than older people. Do any of you volunteer or work in a charity or a nonprofit? Which one do you work with?
Isaac.
It's a very good one too. And again, it's another example of an organization which is, I think it's registered as an NGO.
Yes.
And the idea is not humanitarian. The idea is bringing together people with common interest, which is another very important form of an NGO. It could be a students' union, it could be a business union, or a business group. There are some groups in the United States which are quite popular. The Lions Club. Has anybody heard of the Lions Club? Yeah. These are people at a community level who are successful business people who create organizations to work on problems in their community, which is a nice local approach. So maybe there's something wrong with the school, or maybe there's something wrong with the streets, and the business people get together and try to figure out a solution. It's a very nice form of community activism. Who else volunteers? Go out and volunteer. It'll raise your psychological capital. It'll make you happier to be alive. Does anybody else have any questions?
I have one. Weren't you afraid to give you jobs and then you've been working so many? Why did you just stare at this? I mean, maybe you just chose your priorities or something, but weren't you afraid to lose one of them? And then there was a risk not to get it again, so weren't you?
Yeah, you've been talking to my parents, I think. My parents were horrified when I quit my government job. There's only one job in the United States that you cannot get fired from, and that's the civil service in the government, which is the job I had. So I definitely had job security. I could have worked there for the next 50 years. I don't know. I feel like it depends on your risk aversion, another good economic term, right? And I'm not particularly risk averse. I realize that life is pretty short. And I think when I was given the opportunity to do something that I cared deeply about, that it was not much of a question for me. I would prefer to take the risk and do something I care about now, rather than stay in a place that's safe and not ever know if I could have made a difference. So it wasn't too difficult a decision.
But difficult to talk with the brown children in Bulgaria.
Yeah, it's getting better. I know people read the media and think that it's not, but it is statistically in some ways getting better. The number of Roma kids who are in the university now is significantly higher than it was 10 years ago. So there are gains.
The statistics never comes out in the media.
Yeah, this is the problem I hate the most with the media, is that we actually work with a number of really wonderful Roma university graduates, high school kids. And this is true anywhere in the world that good news doesn't sell. It's always the bad news that sells. And people like a good scandal. I can even give a good example. We support a nice program with Open Society, which gave Roma university graduates the opportunity to do a 3-month internship with a major business, because there's statistically less than 2% of Roma work at a corporation, so they're very underrepresented. So we talked to a number of businesses like EBN, GlaxoSmithKline, KPMG, to see if they would take a Roma intern. And they were very enthusiastic, and they said yes. So we had 15 Roma university students start an internship, and several of them were quite successful. And one of them was particularly successful. He actually got offered a job and worked with EBN for 1.5 years. And then he applied for an MBA in the United States and was given a full scholarship to do an MBA. Like, as a donor, that's the perfect story to tell the media. There's nothing better, right? So we had a press conference, and we brought the intern to speak to the media about his experience with the internship, his experience working, and now his eventual education. And strangely, the media did not talk about him at all. And the next day when I opened the newspapers said, "Amerikanci plaštit na Romite del rotit." It was horrible. So it's very frustrating. We need to think about how to portray things in the media, not just with the Roma, but in general. There are good things happening in Bulgaria, and you never hear about it, so it's unfortunate. So if anybody's interested in journalism, think about that too. It's a great way to make a difference. Any other questions? Anything you'd like to know about? Yeah.
This program is brought to you by AUBGTalks. For more, please visit us at aubg.bg/talks.